Welcome to part 3 of perfectionism. In this segment, we're going to investigate why we feel the need to be so perfect or error-free in our performances. First off, I believe a lot of this comes from modern recording arts, which developed 100 plus years ago. Prior to that time, people didn't demand absolute perfection in a performance because they had never really heard it. But with the advent of recordings and editing, players were allowed to perform a piece over and over and over, or little segments of it over and over, until they could get it absolutely the way they wanted it. And nowadays, with digital editing tools, we can go in and splice and cut out any single note in a piece, or a squeak, or a buzz, or whatever, and make our playing sound as if it has practically no faults whatsoever. So I believe modern recordings has changed the view, the mindset of most classical musicians, and the belief is now that we absolutely have to be flawless in a performance, and anything less than that is unacceptable. Well, I don't believe that's a very healthy mindset personally, but although it's one I have to say that I've followed personally for many years, and it's practically made me neurotic in the process of chasing that. So anyway, let me carry on to a couple of other important points before I get too wound up in my own personal stories here. I'd like to start with a quote from Alexander Pope's poem on an essay on criticism. To err is human, to forgive divine. To err is human, yes, but to forgive is divine. So I thought about that quote a lot, and I believe that making errors is human. Yeah, we all make mistakes. Everybody, even the greatest players, make mistakes. They all do. It's not possible to be absolutely perfect in our first sense. But to forgive, now that's hard. It's hard not to make mistakes, but it's even harder to forgive ourselves when we do. And so I believe that this causes a lot of internal angst, anxiety, and so forth for most performers who are striving to become something close to perfect in their performances. I also believe it causes a lot of players to perform the same pieces over and over and over for fear of failing. So the problem is they don't take risks then, and they become locked into a type of practicing and performing where they only play to not miss. That's maybe not the best type of artistic approach to playing, but more on that later. One thing I found that was very unique was that most jazz and rock musicians are a lot less concerned with making errors in their performance. And I don't mean to say that they are happy with playing sloppy, because they're not. They often play extremely complicated material at very fast tempos sometimes, and making a mistake is not something that any of them wants to do. But what I believe is true is that they think about it less. There's less thought of, oh gosh, I'm going to miss a note. And there tends to be a lot more thought or more focus on being entertaining or interesting or creative rather than being perfect. And I believe that's a very important thing. There's a key there to helping us create the right mindset so that we don't suffer from anxiety from trying to be perfect. So one thing I will say is that in many jazz and rock pieces, the nature of the music is rather different. Much of it is very repetitive. You got sections that are played over and over the same way, and they're often quite simple, the harmonic structures or whatever. And so those can be done sort of mindlessly in many cases. You learn a song, and it's something you only have to think about playing a few chords over and over and over. And then when you play a solo, it's often improvised. So the improvised parts can be done based on how you feel that day. So if your hands are cold, for instance, you could play more slowly and choose longer held tones versus playing a strict script that's already been written for you, and it must be played at a certain tempo and so on. And I'm simplifying things, and I'm trying to make a great dichotomy between jazz and rock musicians and classical musicians, and I know there's much gray area between them. But generally speaking, I believe that the nature of their music allows them to think in a different way so that they can think about being creative or interesting or even entertaining versus having to be flawless, error-free, or perfect. All right, and so there's some very important things that we need to draw from that. Classical music often requires that players have to be more precise, less creative, less flexible in their playing, while also playing oftentimes more complicated, more demanding, and less repetitive materials. And so it requires an extraordinary focus to get through and play well. And I believe that the rigorous demands of technique, memory, and informed performance or performance practice ideas create more challenges than playing repetitive types of music. And because of that, the composition of classical composers enters a realm of the sacred where a script cannot be altered in any way, shape, or form. It must be performed with absolute perfection. It's like going up and reading Shakespeare, but deciding to change a few words based on your own whim. If you were in any Shakespeare society, you would be thrown out of the room, I'm sure, because it's just unacceptable. It's a script. It cannot be altered. And I think classical musicians often feel the same way about the music. It just cannot be altered in any way, shape, or form, or you're destroying it. And I'm not advocating for changing notes, but I am advocating for moving away from, or changing our mindset, and moving away from this obsession with perfect and error-free performances and allowing ourselves more freedom and artistry and creativity in our playing. So that's it for this segment on our need to be error-free or perfect in performance. Hope you'll join me in the next one in segment 4. See ya.